I'm just going to see everybody.
Okay, so the topic here is about nurturing innovation or harnessing disruption. And clearly, the options here are sort of stark. On the one hand, you've got sort of a nurturing, if I dare say, feminine kind of approach of helping something grow organically and giving it the nurturing and the fertilization and whatnot. On the other hand, you have this metaphor of harnessing a wild, raging bull horse moving ahead. As you describe just a few minutes about what each of your organizations are doing in the innovation and disruption area, tell me how you come down on the nurture versus harness phase. So we'll start with Shai.
Okay. Am I on? Okay. Well, as a university, innovation is, our second nature. It's in our DNA. That's what we're all about. We're celebrating 90 years of our opening, and our forefathers have told us that that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be a place that nurtures innovation. And the way that we do that is by way of providing academic freedom. I mean, on a good day, I state that I run Israel's largest R&D company, the Hebrew University, but in all honesty, I'm Israel's largest cat herder. So we have about 1,000 completely and utterly independent researchers. And what we try to do is we let them choose their own research course, and we reward their success. It's as simple as that. Complete academic freedom, but we do recognize that providing that sort of culture that recognizes excellence is something that we need to do.
So you're more of a nurturer.
I'm more of an acceptor, I would say.
Okay.
No,
Hamish?
So I run a startup company incubator here in Sydney called ATP Innovations, and certainly that herding of cats, but it resonated with me. But and from my experience, it's more like herding budgies. For our international visitors, these are flocks of very small birds that fly around all over the place, squawking at you. So as a intimately involved in the development of new ideas, new technologies, the commercialization of these great products through startup companies in our incubator, I certainly have some great insights into this idea of harnessing as well as nurturing. And I think this comes back to the role of an incubator. We've heard some great examples of the role that incubators have played in the success of the startup nation in Israel. And I think here in Australia, we're starting to see the benefits and advantages of what an incubator can do to both nurture, in other words, to take those first-time entrepreneurs, to guide them through the process of articulating a value proposition, deploying the experience that my team has developed over many years to get to the answer quicker. At the same time, I think it's this idea of helping empower entrepreneurs to harness disruption. And I think that idea of empowering entrepreneurs to harness disruption is critical. As we've all heard, as Jeannie and we're giving birth to our children whenever we're creating a new idea or a new product. And the reality, of course, is just how hard it is. So if you're going to do something hard that's going to take 5 to 8 years, I'd love, as Nimrod said, I'd love to say that it's going to take 12 months and you'll make $100 million. But the reality is it's going to take you years. So if you're going to do something hard and you're going to disrupt, you want to be able to harness that disruption.
Edith?
I'm from Trendlines Medical. For those of you who are not familiar with Trendlines, I think we are currently the largest investment group in Israel for pre-seed and seed stage investments, and we invest mainly in agricultural and medical device technologies through our 2 government license incubators. We currently have over 40 portfolio companies, and we start 4 to 5 new companies in the medical space alone every year. I think that what we do, we work very closely with our companies. We are intensely hands-on, and we are involved in all aspects of their work, from technology development to business building, and trying actually to mitigate the risks that are obviously inherent to this process. So we give them the facility, we give them all the infrastructure that is required for promoting these innovations. But at the same time, we're also very focused on where we need to get and what we hope to get from this process.
Okay, Kate?
So maybe a slightly different perspective from me, because I'm Chief Operations Officer of Telstra, and we're very proud to be hosting you all here today in our facility. In terms of our approach to innovation, nurture versus
Harness.
harness, I guess we try to be an ambidextrous organisation, if I can put it that way, because we're being disrupted, and we've lived through sort of several waves of disruption in the last kind of 7 or 8 years in particular. So I would say there's some things where you have to get ahead of that game and you've got to move harder and faster, and there are some things where we're still in the process of figuring out how to nurture good ideas and figure out where to take them. And as a good corporate, we've actually had to try and put some structure around that, because we've got a lot of technological disruption impacting our business. But you figure out, I loved Nimrod's idea about the ecosystem. We're now trying to figure out, how do we become part of a growing ecosystem inside Australia? So we've done things like set up an accelerator called Muru-D. We've tried to connect more closely with the startup community here in Australia. We've set one up in Singapore as well. We've got a lab in Melbourne that Vish will no doubt talk about later on, called Gurua, and it's aimed at co-creating with our customers. We have partnerships with people like Cisco. I can see Kevin in the audience there, where we're trying to sort of create new products in a way that's very, very different to what we would have done historically, where the only ideas were the ideas that were invented and implemented inside Telstra. We've become
Kate,
much more open.
Could you give us an example? I listen to everybody here. They all do great work. You all are essentially involved in both nurturing and harnessing. But if I had to drill down and say, okay, Telstra's this incredible corporation. You said you're building products differently. So give us an example of a specific product that you guys have done in a totally different way that sort of reflects your secret sauce. And I'm going to come back and ask each of you to do that, to talk about, a specific case where you caused or helped or aided that innovation moment to really happen, which reflects who you guys are, especially and individually.
So I guess I would, there's a couple of examples I could give. I could be here all morning, so be careful what you ask for.
We have exactly X minutes, okay?
Look, I guess one example I would give is the work that we've been doing recently with Cisco on a project we call Project Symphony, which is us jointly with Cisco figuring out how we implement SDN and NFV type of environments into our cloud offerings. And, we've done, I think, a very... the way we've developed all of that, you actually wouldn't know most of the time who's from Cisco and who's from Telstra, because we're figuring out what do the customers want, what are they looking for, what are the most important features. We've developed a whole new virtual IPVPN offering. There's a whole roadmap that we're working on with them. Well, I think a number of years ago, we would have regarded Cisco as one of our important vendors that we bought things from, but we wouldn't have had that. And we're trialling DevOps type of developments here so that we experiment and we get, minimum viable products out into the market. So there's a whole sort of different way of working with our strategic partners that it's at the core of all of that. And, clearly we have revenue targets attached to all of this. We're all not just having a nice time playing around. I would also say things like our intelligent video strategy, where through our ventures group, where we've done minority investments in about 24 different companies, we've actually started to grow substantive new businesses for the company. So that's where our health business came from. We've now invested in about 15 or 16 different small e-health type companies, and we're now growing that into a bigger business. Also intelligent video, again, we started out with a minority stake in a company called Ooyala, and now we've become the majority owner of Ooyala, and we've acquired another couple of assets built around that intelligent video strategy, and we're going global with that.
Great. So, Edith.
Maybe I'll describe 3 short examples of the companies that we think that may change actually something in the world. One of them was the first that was actually sold to a European company recently. It is developing a bag for stoma for colon cancer patients. And usually those patients actually wear those bags outside their body. They're hanging over the abdominal wall. This company developed a bag that is actually held inside the body and is actually expelled only upon need. And one of the things that we saw when we understood it's disruptive is when the patients that were part of the clinical study actually asked to continue using the product before the study was completed, because it had a really effect on their lives. Another technology is for spine surgery. I don't know how many of you are familiar with scoliosis, when actually the patients have to undergo significant surgery, like for their spine is fused for 30 centimeters sometimes, and the very large incision. And we've developed a technology that is currently sold in Europe, where the patient actually by like a 5-10 centimeters implant is implanted only at the specific level, and by doing physiotherapy and daily routine, the patient actually is part of the treatment. So this is really a major change. And we have another one now, treating overactive bladder, which is a significant problem in the US. Millions of patients are affected. And the technology we are developing will actually allow medication to be delivered even by a technician, not only a doctor. So we believe this would be really disruptive.
Hamish?
Getting to choose your favorite son or daughter from a portfolio of 70 companies that we have is challenging. So I might change tack, but please check out our website for all of the companies in our portfolio. So I might just, rather than talk about companies, I'll talk about some examples of what I see in terms of interaction and the way that we as an incubator interact with the community. So we've got a broad portfolio of technology companies spanning the life sciences, including medical devices, diagnostics, all the way through to hardware and software companies. And the one thing that I think is quite unique about opportunities for harnessing innovation is where you see this idea of true disruption occurring at the convergence of existing technologies. So what I mean by that is it's either convergence of existing technologies being applied in new markets or new markets that are adopting new ways to do things. So the one example I've got is just by mere proximity. So in our building, we have all these companies co-located together. So we had a optic fiber technology business, so amazing experts in optical fiber technology, next door to some biology people. And they were developing new ways to do diagnostic tests using blood as the source. Now, the two of them had outstanding technology, totally unrelated. But by bringing them together, a little bit like the genetic algorithm to determine variants of viruses, they're able to bring technology that enables you to count photons of light with biology that enables you to detect particles of infection. You bring those two things together, suddenly they're creating an absolutely groundbreaking and truly disruptive way of detecting disease. Now again,
Was this totally serendipitous? I mean, this
Yes.
just, all of a sudden, these two things
Yes.
were in proximity. Did they start talking? Was it your idea? I mean, where did this come from?
so the serendipity is there, but it's also having an organisation like an incubator that is intimately involved in both of those founders' journey and being able to put people together. Now, some of the greatest joy I have is connecting people together inside our incubator and connecting people in our incubator with the broader community, many of whom I see around here today.
Shai, what's been the secret sauce at the university?
I would say the secret sauce is that we recognize that there's more than one target function that we try to aim for. And traditionally, universities were aiming for one target function, and that is we want to get a phone call from Stockholm sometime in September telling us that we're sending people to get a Nobel Prize. We've done that as well, 7 in the last decade or so we're quite happy. But we also recognize that there's another target and avenue for creativity, and that is commercial applications. And I'll give you, you've already stolen part of my thunder. You've shown Mobileye, for example.
You get the credit. I can only talk about it.
Absolutely. We provided the culture, the academic culture that enabled Professor Amnon Shashua, the creator of Mobileye, to live within our campus, to recruit his students, to work as a team, all while establishing this multi-billion-dollar company. And in fact, we cherish the fact that he is still teaching in the university, so students have access to someone that was enabled to do something like that. So we recognize creativity in all of these different avenues.
But I have a question. He's, by the way, got another company called Orcam,
absolutely.
which is going to let the blind see. I mean, this guy is unbelievable in terms of a serial entrepreneur. Yeah. But this doesn't affect his teaching. This doesn't affect his basic research. I mean, how in Israel today? Look, we don't pay our professors what people in the Ivy League get. We have a terrible, I think, brain drain at the moment, where about 30% of our graduates in computer science are ended up teaching in the Ivy League. how do you keep these guys like Amnon on the farm? How do we?
So I want to pick up exactly on what you said. You said, does this affect his basic research? So we have tried very hard to make the distinction that Pasteur did. So we don't distinguish between basic research and applied research. We distinguish between good research and bad research, okay? And I think that if one creates a company based on computer vision that today the market cap is $12 billion and it saves lives all over the world, we in the university can tap our shoulders and say, we've done something good.
And by the way, the university has a piece of this?
Yeah, it does,
Thank God.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, Hamish, you were talking about hard stuff that, it's look for things. Do you really invest in projects that are going to take 8 years to get out? I mean, how do you fund that? In an incubator, I mean, look, I know that the chief scientist is very generous in Israel. We don't have funding for 8 years, okay? In other words, there's guys like Nimrod are driving their companies hard to get, product out. Are you different? And how do you handle the funding challenge?
The funding challenge is critical, particularly in Australia, where we still have a relatively small venture capital market, but it's growing. We have a relatively small angel environment here, but that's growing as well. So what we tend to find is that companies get more inventive at how they can fund their businesses.
Such as?
Yeah. So one thing that always comes up in my conversations with the founders of our business is go to talk to customers. Customers are ultimately going to be the way to fund your business through sales. And the more that you can engage with your customers as part of this development process, the more likely, first of all, you're going to build the right product for them. Secondly, it's going to be much easier to start to sell because they kind of have this almost ownership of the product you're building for them. And thirdly, it avoids you having to rely on investors as an ATM. You can
So
actually...
of your 70 projects, how many have real customers already?
So, and again, because we've got a broad section of different technologies, obviously we have a medical device business in particular that's just completing its Series B at the moment, and it has been funding its existence for the last 8 years through investor dollars. On the other side, we've got companies that had revenue from day one. Now, it might have only been one company.
Why aren't you calling me about these companies?
Dan and I have coffee regularly. So, and again, this is it. If you have customer number one, it may not be the customer that's going to make it may not be the customer that comes and spends $100 million with you. But if you can convince someone to reach into their pocket, hand over some cash, and get some value from that, it's a great validation that you are actually solving a real problem.
So, Edith, you have run 2 government-approved incubators, and in Israel, that means, and correct me if I'm wrong, that literally 85% of the initial funding is coming from the government, about 15% is coming from you guys. How do you then raise, and that's a great deal if you haven't noticed, how do you raise additional money? Do you guys go on road shows, or how effective are you at raising follow-on money for these early startups?
Well, first of all, we focus on the companies that we choose to allow us to raise additional funds later on. And
you kill the other ones?
Well, we don't kill any company. We're all of them are our kids, so we're very much involved in all the companies. But like you've mentioned, yes, our companies enjoy a total budget of approximately $750,000 for an incubation period of 2 years, 85% of which comes from the Office of Chief Scientist. The remaining 15% is invested by Trendlines. And we actually try to pick up companies that will reach a significant milestone during the incubation period, based on which we can go on and try to raise additional funds. And I think that one of our strengths as an incubator is actually the wide wide network of private investors that we have both in Israel and in the US, connections with VCs and multinational companies that help bring these additional funds and actually make connections with key market players. We would do annual roadshows in the U.S. exposing those companies to investors. We have.
Are you going to do it here in Australia?
Well, that's one of the thoughts.
I mean, I understand you're going to be doing something important in Singapore, which you can't talk about
right,
at the moment, but that means you'll be close here. So
yeah. Yeah.
One would hope.
Well, as you said, I can't comment on that yet, but it's actually part of the plans. And we also hold an annual showcase in Israel, participating a lot of private investors, representatives from the venture capital firms in Israel. We do as much as we can to expose the company that have reached the relevant stages to private investor. And the result is that I think that our numbers are a bit higher than the industry. Over 70% of their companies are actually managed to raise additional funds.
So Kate, you'd mentioned that you have multiple models of funding innovation. Sometimes they're internal projects. Sometimes they're working with companies like Cisco. You're taking minority investments. How do you decide in terms of critical technology? I mean, it sounds like, in the e-health, you decided to go out, okay? It sounded like you went out in intelligent video. But how do you make that decision internally, whether it's, off on the balance sheet and, or bringing in outside partners to fund?
I guess it's sort of linked back to our view of what we're seeing out there in markets and amongst customers. So, we have a pretty traditional, I guess, three horizons approach of things that are immediate and near term that we need to sort of have a pretty urgent response to, things that we're not so clear about where, we might place a few more bets because it's not really clear how that landscape's going to pan out. And then the third horizon, which is what our chief scientist, Hugh Bradlow, focuses on, which is the slightly longer term. I must admit, the last few years seems like a lot of things that were in the long term are coming back to the medium term and the short term, but, he tries to focus on the things that are, maybe 5 to 10 years out, but yet we know we need to start placing some bets and, acquiring some knowledge and some partnerships in those areas. And so it's really through that lens that we figure out, are we going to experiment either with a co-creation with a customer or, with people, entrepreneurs who are coming to us with ideas, or are we going to buy a small stake in a company that may be a little bit out there and we'll just see how it goes and learn something about those evolving markets? Or is it something where we go, yes, we now feel confident, we know enough, we're going to go big after this one?
So I want to come back to Shai for a second, because a big topic here is really about bilateral innovation and how Israel and Australia can form a bridge and work together. I mean, Shai, how much of your important research, especially the good research, not necessarily the basic research, but the good research, is really engaged in terms of collaboration today between universities or between countries? I mean, probably you collaborate easier outside of Israel. Israelis like to compete a lot internally, but how big of a role is that?
A tremendous role. I would say that more than half of our publications, which is a simple metric, are published with universities overseas. We forge alliances. It's a matter of seeking additional expertise and the costs of infrastructure. Today, instrumentation is incredibly expensive, so you clearly can't focus on every single realm, so you forge alliances.
But does that continue through into the commercialization phase, or it's research and publishing up to that point? Now, commercialization, that stays in-house.
Both. I see no problem whatsoever. Again, I can make the laconic statement that it's always so much better to have 40% of something than 100% of nothing. But we are a clear believer in that, and it's no problem whatsoever if a wonderful basic research turns out to have something that can be commercializable. We're big kids. We know how to divide the proceeds. No problem at all.
Hamish, have you guys done anything joint with other people abroad with Israel yet, or?
Certainly Israel is an area we're looking at strengthening the bonds, because I think, as we've seen a couple of times in slides today, there's a clear and deliberate focus on areas of expertise, areas of strength inside Israel. I think as Australia, we need to follow a similar process of identifying and doubling down on our areas of strength. If we look at some of the areas that were highlighted before, so where I can see instant synergies, things like the Internet of Things, things like the work that Cisco is doing here in Australia is outstanding. And clearly there's great synergy between what we can do here and what we can do in Israel.
How would that work? Let's drill down. I mean, in other words, you got another incubator right over there. You both do medical things. How do you work together?
Exactly, and I think that this is where it can start, because an individual startup company trying to partner with an individual startup company between Australia and Israel is hard. But it's our job to find the best ways that we can to connect the best of each of our countries together in a way that amplifies the outcomes.
Well, for us, it's maybe more easy. I mean, no doubt that the vast majority of the companies that we start come from Israeli technologies. However, we do have experience in licensing technologies, mainly from U.S. academic centers, from American entrepreneurs. We have currently a company that actually the idea was brought by us by two American surgeons, because one of them operating on Todd Dolliger's, which is the Trendline CEO. So this is how connections are made.
Well, didn't you guys just do this, I thought, very, very innovative deal with the German company where, you know, normally in Israel, with that stoma product for the colostomy bag, normally you would have taken that all the way to development and gone after the market. But you went ahead and maybe you can describe that, because that was, are you allowed to talk about that deal?
Not that much. No,
Oh,
it's actually
okay.
undisclosed, but I'm sorry.
We're shareholders there, guys, so sometimes I've got, you know.
So you know it's undisclosed.
I think that,
All right. Anyway, speaking of international collaboration, I imagine when you're working with Cisco, Kate, you're working with, you know, Kevin and his team. But do you collaborate? I know that you've got some Israeli companies, certainly in the cyber area.
Yeah, and in fact, I was in Israel last week. So I think just listening to some of this conversation, we do think there's a lot that Israel's done that we could learn from in terms of models. I think particularly models for how we collaborate better with our own research institutes. So, you know, I think we're very open to a further dialogue about how could that be good for both countries. We've had, I think, a really refreshing dialogue in Australia in recent times with the new Prime Minister around the innovation agenda for Australia, and I think that provides a lot of opportunity for us to get together with others who have maybe further advanced on that journey and think about what can we learn from the things that you guys have done. It was a very impressive visit, I have to say.
Yeah. Okay, Hamish?
I think it's about finding ways that we can tap into existing networks in both Israel and Australia. You know, at ATP Innovations, we have 4 universities as our shareholders. So we have some insights into the technology being commercialised from Australian universities. We have experience in how the commercialisation process happens, which again demystifies some of this for companies looking to partner with Australian research institutes. And I think also these connections into the market here, which I think is something we should really look at exploring. Given there are some similarities, obviously differences, but there are some similarities between the Israeli market and the Australian market. You know, how can we leverage the fact that Australia could be an ideal first overseas market for an Israeli company?
With a short 2 minutes left to us, if you could each give me a 30-second soundbite of your best piece of advice to an entrepreneur to avoid a mistake or to basically not you know, sort of live long and prosper kind of thing, but give me some kind of a 30-second pearl of here's what I would suggest if I had to give you my best advice. We'll start with Kate.
Be crystal clear on your value proposition for your customer.
Good.
Yeah, just make sure that you have a clear clinical need for the medical, that you have a solid, a very valid business model. It's very important today, and you work with the correct team, the right team. This has been said as well.
Hamish?
Solve big problems that you are truly passionate about making a difference with, and do it with people that can give you context.
Shai?
Well, in academia, patience is the name of the game. And again, not just Nobel Prizes or field medals, there's other ways to show creativity.
And if I had to give one, it would be don't run out of money. Everything else can be handled. Running out of money is fatal. Thank you guys very much.